epic comebacks, a world championship decided, and Sin City. This week we are chatting all about the Las Vegas Grand Prix. So get ready, because you've been summoned to the Steward's office. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Steward's office. I'm Saira, and this week Formula One headed out to Sin City for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Second year in a row that we've been out to Las Vegas. 2023 was a huge success for Formula One in terms of ticket sales, revenue for the city, and the on-track action, which was actually a lot better than what I had expected last year. So Formula One were really hoping that they could recreate that success again this year. And there were a couple of things that really stood out during the Vegas Grand Prix, and we will get into the actual race weekend, but there have been some things going on with the FIA and the drivers that I want to chat about, because it's been 2-3 weeks since the Brazilian Grand Prix now, and I didn't do an episode in between now and then, so I want to have a chat about what's gone on there. Before I get into the drivers and the FIA, because there is a lot going on there, we do have an announcement for the Sauber seat that got released not long after the Brazilian Grand Prix. And sitting next to Nico Hülkenberg in Sauber next year will be a rookie, and it will be Gabriel Bortoleto. He's an F2 driver at the moment. Fernando Alonso is part of his management team, and he will be making the step up into Formula One next year, adding on to our tally of rookies on the grid in 2025. So a really, really exciting time for him. Sauber obviously wanting to look for someone very young and fresh out of Formula 2 to come into the car. I really don't know how much Audi are having a say in their driver lineup at the moment, but if they do have a say, it does kind of seem to indicate that they might want to look at Gabriel Bortoleto coming into the future of Audi and maybe pushing forward with the team. I don't know though. So we do finally have a decision with that Sauber seat, and I think the only one we're waiting on at the moment is VCARB, because Liam Lawson still hasn't been fully confirmed for the 2025 season. But we are slowly getting there, one seat left on the grid. So a massive congratulations to Gabriel Bortoleto. Insane that he's going to be driving alongside his manager next year. I love that, but it also seems absolutely crazy. But amazing that we're getting more and more rookies into Formula One. Let's have a chat about everything going on with the drivers and the FIA. There is a lot going on there, and it all kicked off a couple of days after the Brazilian Grand Prix. The GPDA, who are the Grand Prix Drivers Association, set up an Instagram account. Now, the GPDA basically works as a union for the drivers. It's more of an official channel for them to air their thoughts and feelings and queries to the FIA. A bit more official than just a driver going, even though it is the drivers and George Russell is the head of the GPDA. But the GPDA have never really had a social media platform, this public platform. And after the Brazilian Grand Prix, they set up their Instagram account, and the first, and as far as I know, the only post that they have on there is, well, interesting to read. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing out, but essentially what they said is that they are unhappy with the way that FIA officials are talking to or about the drivers in the media, and that they are unhappy with the inconsistencies when it comes to stewarding decisions and penalties, which really has been the tale of the majority of this season, especially after summer break. I feel we've had so many questions from the drivers and teams about the consistency when it comes to penalties and things like that. But yeah, their unhappiness with the things like they're not allowed to swear. If they do, they get penalized, and things like that. The jewelry, the fireproof underwear issues that they had last year as well. So all of those issues cropping up that they are still unhappy with. So yeah, the GPDA posted that up on Instagram, and I think a lot of people understood where they were coming from, and I get it, especially in that first couple of lines of that statement where the drivers were saying they were unhappy with the way the FIA were talking about them to the public. At the end of the day, yes, these are millionaire drivers that get to travel the world, but the FIA and the FIA president, you know, he is their boss, essentially. They have to listen to what the FIA says, because Formula One is an FIA World Championship. And if you have your boss talking about you in public in not a very nice way, that might make you feel quite small. Nobody's going to want that in any workplace, right? Especially when you think, right, this stuff wasn't told to me before. Like if they had pulled me aside and chatted to me in private about it, it would have been a bit better than just going to the media or going in front of my workplace and talking about it. So I do get it from that perspective as well. But no response from the FIA, and we are still waiting to hear back from them as of right now. What happened then was about a week or so later is that we found out that Niels Wittich, who is the race director for Formula One, part of the FIA, had stepped down from his role as race director. Now, he had taken on the role after Michael Massey had left the FIA, or, you know, had sort of been pushed out from the FIA after everything that happened in 2021. He was rotating as a race director with another person within the FIA, and their name escapes me right now. But it was the two of them being the race director across the entire season, and eventually Niels Wittich took on the full role as race director and was doing the full season by himself. He was leaving with immediate effect. So we found out after the Brazilian Grand Prix, and he is no longer the race director. So Las Vegas, Qatar and Abu Dhabi, the last 3 races of the season, he's no longer going to be the race director. I was really shocked at this decision, right? Because one, this does not help with consistency when we're just changing race directors right at the end of the season. And two, why leave right at the end of the season? We have 3 races left, you know, it's a triple header as well, so it's 3 races in a row. It's not spread out over a month or 2 months or something. So I couldn't really understand what was going on there. And, you know, it sounded like from the statements and the news clippings that, oh, he wanted to pursue other opportunities. Since then, I have heard that apparently Niels Wittich has said, no, I didn't leave, I was fired. So I don't really know what went on there. I don't know if the FIA were looking for a scapegoat. We're sort of hoping, right, if we just fire him, bring someone else in, might stop the complaints. But in terms of consistency, that doesn't particularly help matters. Now, who they've brought in as race director, and I'm really sorry if I do pronounce this name wrong, is Rui Marquez, who was the race director for Formula 2 and Formula 3, so the junior feeder series in the FIA championships, right? So they've brought him up into the role of race director in Formula 1, which does make sense in one respect because he has been the race director in Formula 2 and Formula 3. Okay, doesn't really have the experience in Formula 1, but has that experience in being a race director. So he's come up for the next 3 races in Formula 1. As far as I know, we don't know if he's going to be there in 2025. I think right now he's like an interim race director. We don't know if he's going to be there next year. But I would assume that we will eventually hear the news about who is going to be filling in that role, probably over winter break, maybe in like January, beginning of February time. But changes there that I wasn't expecting. You know, even if Niels Wittich was going to leave or was fired, I would have thought you'll leave it until after Abu Dhabi because only 3 races left, guys. But no, it was very swift action on the FIA to have Niels Wittich out and then put in a new race director. Whether that is the right decision remains to be seen. We've had 1 race with him. I don't think it went badly per se, but we'll see what happens over the next 2 races as well, especially with Qatar being a sprint race, so there's a bit more on track action going on there. We will see what happens, but just very interested in what's going on with the FIA at the moment. So that was some interesting news that happened over that 2-week break between Brazil and the Las Vegas Grand Prix. But let's head into the actual on-track action and what went on during the race. Practices this year were actually really chilled out. Now, if you didn't watch the Las Vegas Grand Prix last year, didn't see the practice sessions, or can't remember, we had flying drain covers last year. Carlos Sainz ended up with insane damage to his Ferrari because a drain cover had come loose when he was driving over it and literally made a hole in the bottom of his car. Thankfully, Las Vegas and F1 had learnt from that and the drain covers were all sealed down and absolutely fine. So we had pretty tame free practice sessions, although we did have Alex Albon stopping in FP2 and then Lance Stroll stopping in FP3. But no massive damage to the cars or anything, and like I said, fairly tame within FP1, 2 and FP3, and Mercedes cars at the top of the timesheets for all of those practice sessions, which was actually pretty impressive considering how badly Brazil had gone. Main highlights in qualifying, I mean, we saw Sergio Perez out in Q1. It's just not great. It's his 6th, I think, yeah, his 6th exit in Q1 this season. And I know the Red Bull car hasn't been brilliant. It's not been as great as it has been in previous seasons, right? It's not bad enough not to qualify into Q2 and Q3. And I know the Red Bull car did struggle throughout practice sessions, but once again, not that bad and not slow enough to be eliminated in Q1. So it was definitely disappointing for Sergio Perez, and it just brings more and more into question what Red Bull are going to do with him as a driver. Q2, we had an awful crash from Franco Colapinto. I think he just read the track a little wrong, turned a bit too early, tried to correct it, wasn't able to, and went into a wall. It was an over 50G crash. It triggered the safety car coming out. He had to get a medical checkup and then had to be checked again on Sunday before the race to make sure that he was actually fit to race. But the damage to his car was absolutely insane. All 4 wheels were a mess, the front wing, the rear wing. And after all the work that Williams needed to do to get both of the cars ready, Alex's and Franco's, before the Vegas Grand Prix, you could see in the mechanics' faces when they panned to the Williams garage, they just looked upset. Thankfully, though, the main thing was that Franco Colapinto was okay. He was able to race on Sunday, but it was a really, really heavy crash. Q3, though, was an interesting one. Lewis Hamilton, who had done really well throughout all the practice sessions, really well in Q1 and Q2, ended up finishing in P10, qualified in P10, just could not get a lap together, had lost the car on both fast lap attempts, and yeah, it just wasn't great for him. So he was starting in P10 when I think realistically everyone thought he was going to be starting at least in the top 5 on the grid, if not top 3. George Russell ended up getting pole position though. I mean, Mercedes, that car just seemed insane this weekend. Carlos Sainz in P2, and then it was Pierre Gasly in P3. I could not tell you what has been going on with the Alpines lately. He beat out Charles Leclerc in a Ferrari, both McLarens. He beat out Max Verstappen in the Red Bull to be in P3. It was absolutely insane. But I think the key thing in qualifying for Max Verstappen and throughout the race weekend, right, he was able to seal his 4th world championship as long as he would finish ahead of Lando Norris. Didn't matter where in the order he finished ahead of Lando Norris, just needed to be ahead of him. So Max did end up qualifying higher up than Lando Norris, which was the main thing, because at least he had that track position advantage straight from the get-go. When it came to the race, I can't lie to you guys. Okay, yeah, I was tired. I was exhausted. And to be fair, the day's going on. It's like 10:30 now on a Sunday, and I honestly could do with a nap right now. But I was also kind of excited for the race because we had really, really good overtakes last year. It looked like a really exciting race in the end, especially because I was someone that wasn't expecting a lot from Las Vegas. So I had high hopes for this race, and the opening laps were a little bit disappointing because we didn't get much going on. There weren't many overtakes going on, and I think part of that was down to the fact a lot of the drivers were trying to save their tyres. Tyre deg and graining out in Vegas was not great. I mean, the tyres didn't seem, especially in the beginning stages of the race, didn't seem to be lasting very long. It was a 2-stopper anyway, and I think they were just trying to save their tyres to try and extend that first stint as long as they could. But it didn't make for the most exciting first couple of laps, I can't lie to you. And yeah, the tyres were an issue. We had Fernando Alonso on soft tyres to start with. I don't know why. He ended up pitting on lap 5. Charles Leclerc was able to jump into P2 on the opening 2 or 3 laps, maybe the opening lap, right? Was trying to chase down George Russell and had used up his tyres way too much, had damaged them and was falling behind, had gone from P2 down to P4 with Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen overtaking him. So he ended up pitting on lap 9 on the medium tyres, and that triggered a couple of drivers to start coming in. Then it really triggered the rest of the pit stops. But 9 laps on a set of tyres, on medium tyres as well, it just seems insane to me. We had Oscar Piastri getting a 5-second time penalty for a false start. Now, he was over the white line, not by much, but I can't lie, the minute they said that he was being noted for a false start, pretty much know it's going to be a penalty at that point, because they wouldn't note it if they didn't have evidence to show that it happened. But yeah, it wasn't that he jump started or anything, or that he had moved off the line a bit too early. It was just that the car was over the white line. And the same thing happened to Sergio Perez a race or two ago. it's strange that it's happened so much this season. I say so much, but even twice feels like a lot. So it is a little bit strange that it happened, but he did need to serve that penalty during his pit stop. Pit stops in general were just weird in this race. We had a flurry of them, and especially that first set of pit stops, right? Weird things going on. We had a near unsafe release between Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda. Yuki nearly went into the side of Pierre Gasly's Alpine, and then Yuki drove over the speed limit sign in the pit lane, which I don't know what happened there, but drove straight through it. We had Lance Stroll, whose tyres were not ready during his pit stop, so we had the mechanics just running out trying to get them on. And then we had Esteban Ocon, whose mechanics weren't ready at all for him to pit, so he drove through the pit lane and then had to go all the way around the lap, go and pit again to actually get tyres on, so had lost time in the pit lane for absolutely nothing. We had Pierre Gasly's engine eventually giving up on him and him having to DNF, and after what was an amazing qualifying for him to qualify in P3 to then DNF from the race very early on was gutting. And then on lap 26, just after the halfway mark, Alex Albon also had to retire from the race. 2 DNFs, both mechanical issues, no incidents on track, which is good. We didn't get any safety cars or anything, but yeah, gutting. And the engine failure from Pierre Gasly is just weird. We don't tend to see a lot of engine failures anymore. The engines are really reliable, and especially when we're this far into the regulations with engines. I mean, 2026, brand new set of regulations, especially to do with the engines, but it's been a while since we've had big changes to any of the car engines, so it is strange to see a reliability issue. And the rest of the race, it wasn't tame. There was a lot of overtaking going on though. There was so much going on at the front of the field, at the back of the field, in the midfield, and I think it's partly because Vegas does have these really long straights that makes it a lot easier to overtake on, even though it's a street circuit, and it can sometimes be hard on a street circuit to get those overtakes in. The long straights and where the DRS zones are placed makes it a lot easier, and turn 14, I think it is, tends to be a really nice overtaking area for the drivers. So we got a fair bit of on-track action, even though you could see the gaps between all the drivers, right? Like there were pockets of drivers, then a gap, and then pockets of drivers, and then a gap. But overall, even with those gaps in between, the little pockets of drivers, there were still battles and, you know, overtakes going on that made it really exciting to watch, especially the tail end of the points. There was a lot of battling going on there, and I couldn't fully tell who was going to be able to get those last set of points, probably from like P8 down to P10, right? Because the McLarens were like P6, P7, and you kind of knew that was going to stay where it was, and everyone from P1 to P7 were going to get points. P8 to P9, it was swapping a lot. Pit stop strategy, the overtakes and everything made it really interesting to watch. So I really actually enjoyed the Las Vegas Grand Prix. We ended up getting a Mercedes 1-2, which I don't understand, guys, honestly, with this team. They have had such an up and down topsy-turvy season, and we'll chat about them more in depth in their weekend. But it wasn't a result I was necessarily expecting from them. George Russell drove an excellent race, kept everything in control, and you know, a win was not in doubt for him. And then Lewis Hamilton working from P10 all the way up to P2 for that Mercedes 1-2. And then it was Carlos Sainz finishing out that podium. Max Verstappen did not win the race, did not finish on the podium, finished where he started actually, in 5th place. But he did seal his 4th world title out in Las Vegas. Such an incredible feat for him. He is only the 2nd driver who has won his first 4 championships back to back. The first one being the ex-Red Bull driver Sebastian Vettel, who also did it with the team. So a massive achievement for him, and you could see just how happy he was coming out of that car, the grin on his face. I mean, even with the helmet on, you could see like the way his eyes had sort of crinkled and the joy in them. An amazing accomplishment for him, and a stress off of his shoulders now for the last 2 races of the season. He can just really enjoy that driving without being worried about his driver's championship. So he is officially a 4-time champion of the world. I know that Sky and F1 really billed that there was a championship battle going on this season. It just never felt close enough to be a championship battle. I mean, the last championship proper championship battle that we had was in 2021, right? It felt like a battle because there was a lot of swapping from P1 to P2 and who was in the lead and who wasn't, and the point swing and the difference between the drivers and the points was a lot smaller. With Lando and Max, yes, it was always mathematically possible, of course, especially when the Red Bull looked like the pace was going and the McLaren looked like it was the stronger car. But even then, I think Max has been such a strong and consistent driver this year, and you know, throughout the past couple of years he's honed his racecraft and everything in that, even without having the quickest car, the strongest car, the best car, he's a consistent enough driver that he brings home the points when he needs to, and it leads to results like this, and it leads to him sealing a world title. Because winning a championship isn't always about having the strongest car. You need a good car, of course you do, and a strong car obviously does help, no one's denying that, but you need consistency from a driver, and that's what Max Verstappen can give, and that is what happens when you are a world champion. That's how you become a world champion. Good cars, consistent driving, that's what you need, and it's what he did this season. So congratulations to Max Verstappen, 4-time world drivers champion. Still a lot going on though in the drivers. I mean, P2 to P3, there's 21 points between Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris, who's currently in P2, and the Constructors' Championship still is not done. That won't be crowned until we finish in Abu Dhabi. So still some exciting racing coming up and battles between the teams. But let's talk about each of the teams now, because McLaren still are leading the Constructors' Championship at the moment. Their drivers finished in P6 for Lando Norris and P7 for Oscar Piastri. Now, yes, Lando Norris has officially said goodbye to the championship for this year. Overall, this race though for McLaren was not their strongest. P6 and P7 is not great for them considering where they have been previously. I don't think they were necessarily coming into this weekend as favourites though. They said themselves their eyes were really on Ferrari. They thought they were going to be the strongest team. And I think with the Drivers' Championship now officially being done with, McLaren's focus is making sure they secure P1 in the Constructors' Championship. There are 24 points between them and Ferrari at the moment, and I think most people are looking at Ferrari being the stronger car over the next 2 races, on top of the fact that Qatar is a sprint race. So yeah, there are going to be extra points on offer there. And yeah, I think for McLaren, they really need to focus on just making sure they bring good points home to keep that gap with Ferrari if they want P1 in the Constructors. But for Ferrari, I mean, okay, let's look at the face of it. P3 and P4 are a really good set of points for the team. That's a podium, very strong finish for them. I went into this weekend, and I think a lot of people did, thinking they were going to be the favourites. That Mercedes 1-2, I would have thought would have been a Ferrari 1-2 with maybe one of the Mercedes or the McLarens on the podium, maybe Max Verstappen. But yeah, P3, P4, still a very good result for the team. However, it looks like there are some problems at Ferrari. Number one is the fact that once again, it seems like we're getting some interesting pit calls and strategy calls from the team, because Carlos Sainz was not happy with the way the pit was happening. He had asked to pit, he had asked multiple times to pit, and Ferrari weren't letting him, and there seemed to be a lot of miscommunication there. Number two though is that Charles Leclerc does not seem happy at all with Carlos Sainz. If you get a chance to check out his post-race radio, I would check that out. There was a lot of swearing on there, and he is not impressed at all. He doesn't feel like Carlos had listened to the team orders. He had been told not to overtake Charles Leclerc, been told a couple of times not to, still carried on and did it, and Charles isn't happy. He was like, you know what, we discussed this before the race, we had a chat about it, we have rules about these sort of things, you know, when we chat about things before the race, and he didn't listen, and it screwed me over, basically. I think it's going to be very interesting what happens there. Even in the media, Charles still was not happy. Carlos did turn around and say, look, you know, I don't think we should have spoken in the media about this, but it's out in the media now. We've all heard the radio, we've all heard the interview. One engineering debrief that I would like to be a fly on the wall for, I can't lie. I mean, look, at the bare bones of it, right, they've only got another 2 races as teammates, 2 races and a sprint, okay? They just need to grit their teeth and bear it if this is going to become a bigger issue than what's happened here. I really don't know what happened. I mean, I don't know why Carlos didn't necessarily want to listen to team orders, especially if it's something that they had discussed beforehand. I think if it happens on the racetrack and you hadn't discussed it, I can understand a little bit more why you wouldn't want to listen. However, if it is something that you've sat down with your teammate, with the entire team, and discussed on both sides what will happen, and if you get asked to do something, both of you will just do it. Yeah, I can understand why Charles might be a little bit upset about that. I'm very curious to see what that dynamic is like going into Qatar, and not so much in the media, because I feel like they'll try and paper over it in the media, but on track, when we get to the actual race, when we get to the sprint, to qualifying and all of that, I'm definitely curious what happens there. Otherwise, you know what? Decent weekend for Ferrari, closing that gap to McLaren, and I don't know. I really can't call the constructors right now. I do think Red Bull are out of the running to compete for P1. Solely at this point because Sergio Perez that far back in a race and not qualifying well isn't going to help their chances. But between McLaren and Ferrari, I couldn't tell you what is going to happen because it's still fairly close. 24 points isn't much, but if McLaren can just maintain that gap, it doesn't need to really get any bigger. If they can just maintain it, they walk away with P1. So that's definitely an exciting battle worth watching for the next two races. Red Bull, look, Max Verstappen won the World Championship, and I think that's all Red Bull are really going to focus on this weekend and for the week going into Qatar, and understandably so, because if I was in their shoes, I would do the same thing. Your driver has just won his 4th World Championship, which is incredible. So on that part, yes, celebrate, enjoy it, because what an epic achievement for him and for the team, because it's not something he can just do on his own. The team were behind him and helped him and supported him, and especially his race engineer, who, let's be honest, has listened to a lot of Max's complaints about the car, because the car has not been great this year. And even at the beginning of this weekend, it wasn't looking great for him. He really, really wasn't happy with the car. Both of the drivers, really. Sergio wasn't happy either. It wasn't behaving the way they wanted it to. It was too high, it was too low. They just didn't have the grip that they wanted to. And I think by the end of FP3, Max finally found the rhythm with the car. They had figured out a setup that was going to work for it, and it just seemed to click into place from there. And yeah, like I said, okay, he didn't win the race. He didn't end up on the podium. But does it matter when you've won a world title? I don't think so. Yes, it's a lot nicer when a world champion seals his world championship and also is on the podium and everything, because you get to see more of the celebrations. But in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. But what was an epic weekend for Max Verstappen, the same could not be said for Sergio Perez. Knocked out in Q1 and brought home a singular point, but finished behind Yuki Tsunoda, who was in the Visa Cash App RB, the sister team of the Red Bulls, who, for all intents and purposes, should be slower than the Red Bull. That Red Bull should easily get past its sister team. But yeah, he finished in P10, brought a point home, and I think we are going to keep having this question, guys, until we get to see more consistency of Sergio Perez at the front of the field. There will be this question of what are Red Bull doing? What are their plans? Because Sergio's performance, yes, in general, the car has not helped their world championship with the constructors this year, right? But Sergio's performances have added on to not being entirely helpful in even getting to P2 in the championship. To go from P1 down to P3, and I don't think, realistically speaking, they're going to move from P3, is not great. And Max is a very strong driver. He's shown the performances he could put in. And like I said, it's part car, part consistency from the driver. I think if Sergio Perez was able to have that same level of consistency as Max is at the front of the field, they would at least be getting P2 right now. But yeah, P10, a point is better than nothing, don't get me wrong. And, to make up those spaces is great, but still definitely questions being asked about what Red Bull are doing with Sergio's seat and what's going to happen in the future. Moving on to Mercedes, and what a brilliant weekend for them. Lewis Hamilton topping the timesheets in FP1 and FP2, George Russell topping the timesheets in FP3 and then in quali, George winning, Lewis starting in P10, moving into P2. Exceptional performances from the team. It's a car that seems to just really work in cold weather. And to be fair, Lewis even said he's not sure why the car worked so well, but it was the best it had felt all season. George Russell like I've mentioned, had such an epic race. I mean, drove straight to the win, no problem for him. Lewis Hamilton, I mean, you know, the battles and the overtakes he needed to do, the way he had to also look after his tyres as well as trying to get past and battle everyone. A really, really brilliant race for him, and one that I think he should definitely be proud of, and was also driver of the day, which I can't disagree with at all. I think he drove such an amazing race, and it was a brilliant comeback because he was so disappointed with Q3. He just lost the car. First time around, I think he made a mistake, and then second time around on his last fast lap, I think he just said he lost the rear of the car. So it was gutting because Q1 and Q2 had gone so well for him, and I know he had hoped for more, and there would have been a lot less work for him on Sunday and potentially a win or a battle with George for the win had he qualified further up. But I still think to go from P10 to P2 was an extremely good drive for him. Aston Martin took home no points from this race. I did have to double check that, which is why I was questioning it. But yes, Fernando Alonso finished in P11, Lance Stroll in P15, which not great for the team. Lance Stroll, though, didn't have any radio throughout the race. They had to communicate with him through the pit board, so all of his lap times, when to box, and like any buttons that he needed to change for engine modes and everything had to be done when he was crossing the finish line. So I can't imagine it was an easy race for him, but that might also explain why there was no one there with tyres ready when he went to pit and they had to run out and get them. Haas have jumped ahead of Alpine for P6 in the championship, 8th place for Nico Hülkenberg, 12th place for Kevin Magnussen, and yeah, Hülkenberg bringing in some crucial points for the team. And that battle between Haas, Alpine and VCARB is going to be going on right till the end of the season now. So last two races, that battle for P6 is going to be going on between those three teams. It's going to be very close. Alpine, like I mentioned, Pierre Gasly had DNF'd. There was an issue with the cylinders in the engine, and then the engine just blew. And thankfully, though, it wasn't an on-track incident and he was safe, managed to get to the pit lane and stop the car there. Gutting for him. I really feel for him after what was a really good weekend beforehand. Esteban Ocon, who had pitted, tyres weren't ready, had to go through and pit again. Apparently there was a miscommunication between the Alpine engineers and the mechanics, and the engineers hadn't let the mechanics know that Esteban was coming into pit, which caused there to be no one, literally no one there for him when he pitted. Like, not even like Lance Stroll where the mechanics were around, they just need to run and get the tyres. There was no one there. But yeah, no points for them this race. They have lost 6th place to Haas in the constructors, but like I said, still very close between the teams. VCARB, I mean, P9 for Yuki Tsunoda, who I think had a brilliant race, battling with people like Oscar Piastri, and yes, seemed really happy with the car. Liam Lawson finished in P16 and just wasn't happy with the car, and I saw a couple of the shots of Liam's overtakes and everything during the race, and it's just really interesting. He has quite an aggressive driving style, I think is the best way to put it. It's quite aggressive, and I don't know whether that's something that, you know, racecraft will come in as time goes on, but it makes me almost jump sometimes with how close he gets to the other cars and how aggressive it is. So might be down to the fact that he wasn't happy with the car if he didn't feel like he was fully able to get it to do what he wants. But yes, an interesting drive from him and not a great one. I mean, he just wasn't happy with how the car was behaving this weekend. So P16 finish, P9 for Yuki Tsunoda, who, like I mentioned, finished ahead of Sergio Perez. Williams obviously had a DNF from Alex Albon, which we heard was because there was debris in the radiator, so gutting for him. And then Franco Colapinto, I said, was able to race, had to start from the pit lane because of the massive rebuild done to the car, and basically went from the pit lane to P14. So not a bad drive, not brilliant. And you know, for Williams, I just don't think this was a great weekend between the crash from Colapinto in Q2 and then Alex Albon DNFing. This wasn't great. And finally, Sauber, who, you know what, actually wasn't that bad for them. Yes, still no points, all right, okay. Valtteri Bottas was in P18, which was essentially last place after the DNFs. However, for Zhou Guanyu, he finished in P13. And this was probably one of the races that he has been closest to the points. Probably one of the best races this season for him so far. So you know what, actually, I've got to give it to Zhou Guan Yu that this was a really good race for him. He did look like he could get in the points, and I was hopeful at one point. P13, I think, is a pretty decent finish for Sauber right now. But that about sums up the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Like I said, a lot of overtakes going on, a lot of on-track action. We finally have a Drivers' Championship. I can't believe it's taken us until, where are we now? Race number 22? To finally crown a Drivers' Champion. That's crazy considering the dominance that Red Bull have had over the last couple of seasons. You can tell that in general, yes, this was a much closer season, and we finally have a Drivers' Champion. Still don't have a Constructors though. That is definitely going right to the end of Abu Dhabi, and I can't wait for that. We do have a race next week though. This is a triple header. Las Vegas is done. 2 more races left. We head out to Qatar with a sprint weekend as well. It's going to be interesting. Like I said, the drivers, all of them now can breathe. We have a Drivers' Champion, but for the teams, and I think especially McLaren and Ferrari right now, heads down and still battling for that Constructors' Championship, because it's gonna be an interesting one. So I will be back next Tuesday at 9 a.m. for a review of the Qatar Grand Prix, and I cannot wait. Thank you guys so much for listening, and diolch yn fawr. Make sure you find me on Instagram and TikTok for more motorsport content at stewards_office, and I will see you guys the next time you're summoned to the Stewards office.